She was exhausted, broke, and clinging to her last chance for a better life. But when she missed her flight, everything fell apart. Or so she thought. Because the stranger standing behind her at the airport? He was about to change her world forever. And he didn't even know it yet. Stay tuned, this is not your typical love story. Hannah Carter clutched her 6-year-old son Ethan's small, sweaty hand as she struggled to drag her worn-out suitcase through the crowded hallways of Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Her unruly chestnut-brown hair kept falling into her weary eyes, and her legs ached after the long, uncomfortable bus ride from their tiny apartment in Fort Worth, Texas. Dressed in a simple cotton blouse and a pair of faded jeans, she felt completely out of place among the polished business travelers rushing past, rolling sleek designer luggage behind them and chatting effortlessly on their high-end smartphones. "Mom, I'm hungry," Ethan whined, his small body feeling heavier than usual after spending nearly 4 hours navigating the city's public transportation system. "Just a little longer, sweetheart," Hannah murmured, glancing down at the crumpled ticket in her trembling hands. 8C29, or was it C92? The numbers blurred before her exhausted eyes, strained from a relentless week of double shifts at the diner. This flight to Seattle, Washington was her last chance. A long-awaited job interview that could finally pull them out of the suffocating cycle of struggle. Their current home, a one-room rental where they shared a thin mattress on the floor, was no place to raise a child. For 6 months, Hannah had put aside every spare penny to afford these tickets. Mornings were spent waitressing, nights cleaning office buildings, and weekends taking odd jobs just to scrape by. She had even sold the delicate silver engagement ring she once cherished, the last remnant of a past life that now felt like a distant dream. The opportunity in Seattle promised a salary that could give Ethan a safe, stable childhood, something she had been struggling to provide since his father had walked away, leaving behind nothing but unpaid bills and broken promises. With each step, the weight of her single suitcase grew heavier. Inside, alongside their few belongings, lay the only professional outfit she owned, a dark gray blazer and slacks purchased from a second-hand store. The sleeves were slightly frayed, but she had stayed up late the night before carefully stitching them under the soft glow of a bedside lamp after Ethan had fallen asleep. When she finally spotted what she hoped was the correct gate, Hannah let out a small breath of relief. Her back throbbed and her stomach ached. She had skipped breakfast to save money for Ethan's snack. She approached the counter where a bored-looking airline employee was rapidly typing on her computer. "Good afternoon," Hannah said, her voice betraying the nerves she was desperately trying to hide from her son. "Flight 217 to Seattle?" The employee barely looked up. "Name?" "Hannah Carter and Ethan Carter." The sound of clicking keys filled the tense silence. Then the woman frowned, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard. "I'm sorry, but I don't see these names on the list." Hannah's heartbeat thundered in her ears and a cold sweat formed along the back of her neck. "There must be some mistake," she said quickly, rifling through her worn-out purse with trembling fingers. "I bought these tickets 3 weeks ago." Her hands shook as she frantically scrolled through old emails on her cracked, outdated phone, a Christmas gift from her elderly neighbor who couldn't bear the thought of her being without a way to stay connected. Then a deep yet gentle voice spoke from behind her. "Are you sure you're at the right gate?" Hannah turned around and found herself face-to-face with a tall man in a well-tailored navy suit. His dark hair was neatly styled, and his kind hazel eyes seemed to pierce straight through the fragile confidence she was desperately holding onto. There was something steady about him, an effortless calm that sharply contrasted with her rising panic. "Yes, I'm sure," she said, hastily holding up her phone to show him the email. "Flight 217 to Seattle, 3:15 p.m. The man, who introduced himself as Jonathan Pierce, glanced at the screen, his sharp gaze scanning the details with the precision of someone used to handling high-stakes situations. "This is gate C92, he said, checking his watch with a smooth flick of his wrist. "Your flight was departing from gate C29. Hannah's stomach dropped. Jonathan's expression softened as he glanced at the time. "And it took off about 20 minutes ago." The air seemed to thin around her. Her knees wobbled and she gripped the counter to keep herself upright. Her interview was in 3 hours. Her one shot at turning things around. A real job, a fresh start, a chance to finally give Ethan the childhood he deserved, a home where he could sleep in his own bed, where she wouldn't have to choose between paying rent or buying medicine when he caught a cold. Sensing his mother's distress, Ethan tugged at the hem of her sleeve. "Mom?" His small, worried voice cut through her chest like a knife. Jonathan observed the scene in silence, his eyes flickering to the calloused fingers Hannah clenched into fists and the scuffed sneakers on Ethan's feet. After a brief pause, he turned back to the airline employee. Are there any available seats on the next flight to Seattle? The woman, who up until now had been indifferent, suddenly sat up straighter. Yes, but transfer my miles for 2 seats. Hannah's head snapped up. What? Jonathan met her stunned gaze without hesitation. I can't let you miss that interview. But why? I overheard your call earlier while I was waiting in line, he admitted with a small shrug. I run a consulting firm. I recognize determination when I see it. You crossed an entire city with your son for this opportunity. That says something. Hannah shook her head, emotions twisting painfully in her chest. I can't accept this. It's too much. I don't even know you. Jonathan smiled, something warm flickering behind his confident demeanor. You can. And you will. His tone was light but unwavering. Think of it as an investment in your future. And Ethan's. Then, with a smirk, he added, besides, I have way too many miles and nowhere to go. As the airline employee processed the transfer, Jonathan casually pulled out his phone. You should eat something before the flight. I saw a cafe near the terminal with some good options. He glanced at Ethan. Do you like grilled cheese? Ethan's face lit up. Yes. Hannah hesitated, her mind still spinning. Jonathan gestured toward the counter. Let's get you checked in first. Then we can talk over lunch. No strings attached, just a conversation. As much as she wanted to refuse, she knew one thing for certain: she couldn't afford to let pride stand in the way of her son's future. So, with a deep breath, she nodded. All right? She had no idea that in accepting a simple plane ticket, she was about to change the course of her life forever. By the time they boarded the flight, Ethan was happily munching on a cookie Jonathan had bought for him at the cafe, and Hannah felt a strange mix of emotions. She didn't trust easily. Life had taught her that people always wanted something in return. Yet Jonathan had asked for nothing. As they settled into their seats, she glanced at him from the corner of her eye. His posture was relaxed, yet there was something intensely focused about him, as if he was always thinking 3 steps ahead. So, what's in Seattle? He asked, breaking the silence as he fastened his seatbelt. Hannah hesitated before answering. An interview. Executive assistant position. It's not glamorous, but the pay is stable and it comes with benefits. She swallowed. Health insurance for Ethan. Jonathan nodded, his expression unreadable. You've been working multiple jobs, haven't you? She turned to him, startled. How did you? He gave a half smile. You have that look. The kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from one job, it comes from too many. She exhaled, staring at the back of the seat in front of her. I wait tables in the morning, clean offices at night, and pick up extra work whenever I can. She let out a dry chuckle. I've gotten pretty good at fixing broken appliances. People will pay you cash to fix a washing machine instead of replacing it. Jonathan tilted his head, intrigued. That's a useful skill. Hannah shrugged. It pays the bills. Barely. Their conversation was interrupted by the flight attendant approaching with a kind smile. First time flying? She asked, noticing the way Hannah gripped the armrests. That obvious? Hannah laughed nervously. The woman whose name tag read Linda placed a small extra blanket over Ethan, who had already dozed off against his mother's arm. Don't worry, sweetheart. I was a single mom too. I know how hard it can be. Hannah blinked, surprised. Linda gave her a knowing look. We get used to doing everything alone. But sometimes the universe puts people in our path at the right time. She glanced at the business card Jonathan had casually slid across the tray table earlier. Hannah had barely glanced at it, but now she read the words. Jonathan Pierce. CEO Pierce Strategies. She swallowed hard. He wasn't just some kind businessman. He was someone important. I appreciate what you did today, she said softly, keeping her gaze on the card. But you didn't have to. Jonathan smiled, leaning back in his seat. Actually, I did. Hannah wasn't sure what he meant, but something about the certainty in his voice made her heart beat a little faster. Back at Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport, Jonathan sat in his private executive lounge, staring at his laptop screen, but his mind was elsewhere. Hannah Carter. A woman who had everything stacked against her, yet refused to give up. During his virtual meeting with investors, while numbers and market projections filled the screen, his thoughts kept drifting back to her determined expression, the kind that came from years of fighting battles no one else could see. Sitting in a quiet section of the lounge, he did something he never did. He typed her name into LinkedIn. Her profile was modest but impressive. Online business management courses completed late at night. Certifications in administration software. Glowing recommendations from past employers. And all of it while raising a child alone. Jonathan exhaled, rubbing his jaw. It hit him harder than he expected, the contrast between her reality and his own. Mr. Pierce. His assistant's voice pulled him back to the present. Seattle's branch is on the line. He straightened in his chair. Put them through, Lisa. The screen flickered, revealing familiar faces, executives waiting for his direction. But for the first time in years, his focus wasn't entirely on business. Meanwhile, 30,000 feet above ground, Hannah sat in her seat, trying to keep her hands steady as she reviewed her interview notes. The paper was already crumpled from being folded and unfolded too many times. Each underlined word represented hours of late-night studying. Ethan was still asleep, his head resting on her lap. She smoothed down his hair, her chest tightening. This job had to work out. A soft voice interrupted her thoughts. Can I get you anything? Hannah looked up to see Linda, the flight attendant, standing beside her with a cup of coffee. Looks like you need this, Linda added with a warm smile. Hannah hesitated, then took it. Thank you. Linda sat down in the empty seat beside her, taking advantage of a quiet moment in the flight. You remind me of myself, you know, she said. Hannah raised an eyebrow. Really? Linda nodded. I was a single mom too. I know how terrifying it is to put everything on the line for your kid. She glanced down at the business card still in Hannah's hand. But I also know that when people like him offer help, it's usually for a reason. Hannah blushed, shaking her head. Jonathan was just being kind. He's probably already forgotten we exist. Linda chuckled knowingly. Sweetheart, I've been doing this job for over a decade. Men like him don't do things like this without a reason. Before Hannah could respond, Ethan stirred beside her. Mommy, he mumbled sleepily. Are we in Seattle yet? Almost, buddy, she whispered, kissing the top of his head. Linda stood, straightening her uniform. I'll bring some hot chocolate for him. And maybe a refill for you. Hannah nodded, grateful. As the flight continued, she let herself think about Jonathan Pierce. There was something about him. Something that scared her. Because for the first time in a very long time, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't completely alone anymore. Back at the airport, Jonathan was finishing up his video conference. But his decision had already been made. Lisa, I need you to adjust my schedule. His assistant hesitated. But sir, you have a meeting in San Francisco tomorrow. Reschedule it. I'll be in Seattle for the next 2 days. Silence. Then a sigh. This has something to do with the woman from the airport, doesn't it? Jonathan smirked. Maybe. But we also have that pending audit at the Seattle branch, don't we? Lisa hesitated. The audit that wasn't scheduled until next month? That's the one. He shut his laptop with quiet determination. Oh, and Lisa, book a table for 3 at Beacon Hill Bistro tonight. Something comfortable, not too formal. A quiet section. 3, sir? Yes. A 6-year-old will be joining us. Make sure they have a kids menu. The captain announced the descent into Seattle. Hannah straightened her slightly wrinkled blazer, her stomach tightening. The interview was with Westwood Logistics, a mid-sized company. The salary wasn't extravagant, but it was stable. And it came with benefits, including health insurance for Ethan. Mommy, look. The clouds look like cotton candy. Ethan pressed his face against the window, leaving tiny fingerprints. Hannah smiled, gently wiping the marks away. It amazed her, his ability to find joy in the smallest things. Even on the hardest nights, when dinner was nothing but buttered toast, when money barely stretched past rent, Ethan never lost a spark. The plane landed smoothly. As they made their way through Seattle-Tacoma International Airport, her phone buzzed. Her heart stopped at the message. Her interviewer was sick. The meeting was rescheduled for the next day. No, she murmured, panic rising. Her budget was tight. Too tight to afford a night in a hotel. She barely had enough for a taxi. Then another message came in. Unknown number. Heard your interview got rescheduled. The Alderwood Hotel is expecting you and Ethan. Dinner at 7 p.m. at Beacon Hill Bistro. Great food, family-friendly atmosphere. This isn't charity, it's networking. Jonathan. Hannah froze, rereading the message. How did he know? Why did he care? More importantly, should she accept? Mommy, where are we going now? Ethan asked, his little hand gripping hers. Hannah looked at her son, then at her phone, and finally at Jonathan's business card, now slightly creased from being held too tightly. Sometimes Linda was right. Help should be accepted when it comes. But as she typed her response, she couldn't help but wonder. Was this just professional courtesy? Or was something else beginning to unfold? The Alderwood Hotel lobby was elegant but overwhelming. Hannah clutched Ethan's hand as they approached the reception desk, feeling entirely out of place. Her reflection in the polished glass doors showed a woman who didn't belong, the faded jeans, the exhausted eyes, the suitcase that had seen better days. "Reservation under Carter?" she asked hesitantly. The receptionist gave a professional smile. "Yes, Ms. Carter. The executive suite per Mr. Pierce's instructions." Hannah blinked. "Executive suite?" The woman handed over 2 keycards. "Room service is available 24/7 and a selection of outfits has been arranged for your interview tomorrow." Hannah's breath hitched. "Outfits? A stylist delivered them an hour ago. They're in your room on the 12th floor." She barely had time to process this before Ethan burst into the hotel room, his excitement contagious. "Mommy, look." He ran to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. "This is the coolest place ever." Hannah exhaled, stepping inside. The room was larger than their entire apartment in Fort Worth. On the king-sized bed, 3 neatly folded professional outfits lay waiting, each tailored in her size, complete with matching shoes. "Mommy, I have presents too," Ethan shouted, pulling a bag off the couch. Inside were new clothes and a set of educational toys. Hannah sank onto the edge of the bed, overwhelmed. Jonathan's generosity seemed to have no limits. And that terrified her. No one did this much for a stranger. Her ex-husband had taught her that lesson in the worst possible way. Her phone buzzed. "Jonathan. Hope the room is suitable. A driver will pick you up at 6:30 p.m. for dinner. No pressure, just a meal and conversation." She stared at the screen. Then at Ethan, who was already curled up on the oversized chair, playing with one of his new toys. What was she supposed to do with this? "Mommy, can we stay here forever?" Ethan asked innocently. Hannah hesitated, then forced a smile. "Go take a bath, kiddo. We're having dinner somewhere special tonight. Beacon Hill Bistro, 7 p.m. The restaurant was charming and intimate, with soft lighting and a breathtaking view of the city skyline. Jonathan was already waiting when they arrived. He had traded his suit for something more casual, a dark blue button-down with the sleeves rolled up. His smile was warm when he saw Ethan practically bouncing in excitement in his new outfit. "You didn't have to do all this," Hannah said as they sat down. Jonathan shook his head, helping Ethan with the kids' menu. "Actually, I did." Hannah frowned. "Why?" "I looked into your background today," he admitted. "It's impressive considering the circumstances. But I also know how hard Seattle can be for fresh starts." The dinner went surprisingly well. Ethan was thrilled when the chef himself came to the table to prepare his dessert. And Hannah, who hadn't truly laughed in months, found herself relaxing. Jonathan had a way of making people feel at ease. His stories about business failures made her realize that even successful people had struggled. Then her phone rang. She stepped away from the table. It was Westwood Logistics. Her stomach knotted. The job had been filled internally. The interview was canceled. Her hands trembled as she hung up. Jonathan noticed the second she returned. "Hannah? It's over," she whispered, barely keeping herself together. "The job. Thea." Her voice cracked. "Mommy?" Ethan's small, worried voice shattered her. Jonathan discreetly signaled to the waiter, who immediately offered to take Ethan to the kitchen for a quick tour. Then he turned back to Hannah. "Tell me everything." And for the first time in a long time, she did. She told him about the months of preparation, the sacrifices, the nights spent studying after Ethan was asleep. How this job was supposed to be their ticket out. Jonathan listened in complete silence, his face unreadable. When she finished, he exhaled. Maybe the universe has other plans. Hannah let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "What plans? Going back to Fort Worth? Juggling 3 jobs again?" Jonathan leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "Or you could accept a position at my company." She blinked. "What?" He folded his hands on the table. "Pierce Strategies needs a project coordinator for our social impact initiatives. Someone who understands real struggles, someone who's lived them. Someone who can solve problems that most executives don't even know exist." Her pulse quickened. "But I don't have experience in that field." "You have more experience than you think." His voice was steady. "I read your LinkedIn. The late-night courses. The certifications. Balancing multiple jobs while raising a child alone." He tilted his head. "You've been managing resources, problem-solving, and building relationships for years, just in a different way." Hannah felt like the ground had shifted beneath her. "Why are you doing this?" she asked, almost afraid of the answer. Jonathan held her gaze. "Because I believe in investing in extraordinary people." Then, after a brief hesitation, he added, "And because maybe I'm a little tired of eating alone in expensive restaurants." The moment was interrupted by Ethan, who came running back from the kitchen wearing a paper chef's hat with a proud grin. Something between Hannah and Jonathan had shifted. Back at the hotel, Hannah tucked Ethan into bed, brushing his curls from his forehead. But her mind was elsewhere. Jonathan's offer echoed in her thoughts. It was tempting. So tempting. A real salary. Stability. Health insurance. But life had taught her to question things that seemed too good to be true. Her phone buzzed. A message. Jonathan. The offer is real. The job is yours because of your skills, not charity. But I understand if you need time. Either way, the hotel is covered for the week. Rest. Think. Also, Ethan loved the chef's hat. Jay. Hannah stared at the screen. In less than 24 hours, her life had flipped upside down. First, the devastation of losing the interview. Now, an opportunity she never could have imagined. And something else. Something she didn't want to admit. Because every time she thought about Jonathan's smile, her heart reacted in a way she hadn't felt in years. The next morning, Hannah woke to the sound of Ethan's laughter. He was pressed against the hotel window, watching the planes take off over the Seattle skyline. The early morning light painted the city in gold and pink, so different from the worn-out streets of Fort Worth. "Mommy, can we live here?" Ethan asked, eyes bright with hope. Hannah sat up, rubbing her forehead. Jonathan's offer had been circling in her mind all night. She had even done some research. Pierce Strategies was a highly respected company. The job wasn't a favor. It was real. She even found the position listed on their corporate website officially open. Her phone rang. "Linda, how are you, sweetheart?" At the sound of her voice, Hannah's walls finally broke. She told her everything. The canceled interview. The job offer. The fear of believing in something too good to be true. Linda listened patiently, then sighed. "You know," she said, "when I met my second husband, I was so hurt from my first marriage that I almost let happiness slip away." Hannah swallowed hard. Sometimes the universe breaks us first to prepare us for something better. But what if I'm just confusing this with gratitude? Hannah asked. Linda chuckled knowingly. "Honey, I saw the way you two looked at each other on that plane. That wasn't gratitude." A knock at the door interrupted them. A hotel staff member stood outside. "Room service, ma'am. Breakfast is being served on the rooftop." Hannah frowned. "Rooftop?" "Mr. Pierce's request." Hannah stepped onto the rooftop terrace and stopped in her tracks. A table had been set near the glass railing overlooking Elliott Bay. A stack of fluffy chocolate chip pancakes sat on Ethan's plate. In front of her, a folder full of documents awaited. She hesitated before opening it. Inside was not just the official job offer, but also information on nearby schools for Ethan, apartment listings, and a handwritten note. No pressure. Just possibilities. Jay. Hannah spent the morning reading through every detail. The salary was more than enough to finally breathe again. Full benefits. A relocation package. Flexible hours. It was everything she had been working toward. Everything she had wanted for Ethan. Her phone buzzed. "Jonathan. Care for a coffee? Promise I won't talk about work." 3 p.m. Jonathan was waiting in the hotel lobby, looking more relaxed in jeans and a sweater. As they walked to a small cafe near Pike Place Market, Ethan happily skipped between them, holding both their hands, splashing in puddles from the morning rain. "You know," Jonathan said once they were settled inside, Ethan distracted by a giant cookie, "I don't usually do this." Hannah raised an eyebrow. "Do what?" "Offer jobs to strangers." She tensed slightly. "No," he chuckled. "Get personally involved." Her heart skipped a beat. "Jonathan." "Let me finish," he said gently. "When I saw you at the airport, something changed. It wasn't pity. Or charity. It was recognition." Hannah frowned. "Recognition?" Jonathan leaned forward. "I grew up in a trailer park in Michigan. My mom worked 3 jobs just like you. I got through school on scholarships. I sold encyclopedias door to door to pay for college." Her eyes widened. He smiled slightly. "The only difference is someone believed in me at the right time." Ethan came bouncing back to the table, face covered in chocolate. Without thinking, Hannah wiped his mouth with a napkin. Jonathan watched her. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because I want you to understand that the job offer is real. It's based on your qualifications." He hesitated for just a second before adding, "But my feelings are real too." Hannah felt the air leave her lungs. "This is complicated," she whispered. "There's Ethan. Who, by the way, just asked if he can call me Uncle John." Jonathan smirked. Hannah groaned, covering her face. "Oh my God." Jonathan laughed. "Look," he said, his voice soft but certain. "I'm not asking for anything except a chance. A chance to get to know you. Both of you. No pressure. No expectations. She stared at him, her walls crumbling. And if it doesn't work out, she whispered, the job is yours no matter what. Whatever happens beyond that, we'll figure it out. At that moment, Ethan spilled his hot chocolate, staining his brand new shirt. Instead of getting annoyed, Jonathan helped clean up, making silly faces that had Ethan giggling uncontrollably. Hannah watched them, feeling something warm and unfamiliar settle deep in her chest. Maybe, she thought. Maybe I don't have to do everything alone anymore. She took a deep breath. Yes, she said softly. Jonathan's eyes lit up. Yes to everything. The job. Seattle. She exhaled. And the chance. Jonathan's smile could have lit up the entire city. Ethan, sensing the excitement, jumped between them. Can we have more hot chocolate to celebrate? 3 months later, Hannah sat at her new desk at Pierce Strategies, finishing a proposal on corporate support programs for working mothers. A framed photo of Ethan grinning in his chef's hat sat beside her keyboard. A small succulent plant rested on the corner of her desk, a gift from Jonathan on her first day. Ethan was thriving at his new school. Their apartment was small but warm, and for the first time, he had a room of his own. On weekends, Jonathan took them to the aquarium, the parks, or they spent lazy afternoons baking in his kitchen. Linda had been right. Sometimes the universe places angels in our path. But sometimes, Hannah thought, as she glanced out the window, watching Jonathan and Ethan laughing together at the park below, those angels decide to stay. Her phone buzzed. Jonathan, dinner tonight? Ethan wants to make that lasagna from the kids' cooking show. Hannah smiled, typing her reply. Life wasn't perfect. There were still challenges. But now she wasn't facing them alone. And when Jonathan kissed her for the first time under the twinkling Christmas lights of Seattle, with Ethan clapping and shouting, "Finally!" in the background, she knew. Some flights get delayed for a reason. That busy airport hadn't just changed her career. It had changed her destiny. And for the first time in years, her heart, like the planes Ethan loved to watch, was finally flying in the right direction.